And then all of a sudden, oh no, we're almost made it. Oh no, all these problems. Welcome back to Subscriber Games. So today we're taking a look at a game from a subscriber named Simon, and he's a pretty strong player. So he was rated 1670 at the time that this game was played. But I want this series to be very beginner friendly. So what I'm going to do in this episode is really try to highlight all the great things that Simon did. And if you're, a lower rated player, let's say you're below 1,000 or below like 1,200, this is going to be a great episode to see what does higher level play look like and what are the things that Simon and other players at this level are doing that are making the difference. And so I also made some graphics, a couple graphics for you guys to highlight some of these fundamental things. So let's take a look at those right now. So I'm calling this do your chores. All right. So number one, every game, you should do these things every single game, guys. Number one, fight for the center. If you don't fight for the center, your position can become very cramped and it can be hard to find good spots for your pieces. So your position can be very weak. Number two, you want to mobilize and utilize your entire army against your opponent. If you're only using one or two pieces and your opponent is using their whole army against you, who do you think is going to win? Probably the guy who's using the whole army, right? And number three, you want to get your king to safety. So almost every game you should castle, and you want to make sure that you leave one side that's going to be safe with your pawns near your king to keep you safe. All right. And I'm going to show this graphic every episode. Let me know if there's anything that could be better about it. You can pause if you want to read some of these details on it. But we're going to highlight throughout the game how Simon did a great job of these things. And you might also be wondering, well, when can you skip your chores? Because there are actually some moments where you can't just always develop. So the times to do that are number one, when dealing with a threat, and number two, capitalizing on some opportunity, right? So sometimes things happen and you need to deal with them. But then once there's like a calm moment, you want to get back to your chores and develop your entire army, get your king safe, fight for the center. All right, so we're going to see Simon did an excellent job of this in this game. And there was a little bit of a shaky finish to the end game, as we will see. But overall, Simon, great job. And sorry this video is taking me so long to get out. There's been a long gap. I mentioned on the channel, I have some health issues I'm working through. So sorry for the delay, but it's finally here and we are charging forward. So this was a 10-minute game. And Simon's opponent was about 1650 elo, and so was Simon. And as we go through this, I want you guys to remember what I talked about in the beginning. Remember doing your chores, right? What were those three things, do you remember, that you're supposed to do every single game? Fight for the center. Develop all of your pieces, so bishops and knights first, and then later you do rooks and queen. And get your king safe, so castle every game. You should do that every single time. These guys did a great job. Let's take a look. Starts off with king pawn, fighting for the center immediately. Simon goes for the Caro Kann. And look at how both players are fighting for the center, right? These are the central squares, and then this is kind of the secondary central square region. They're both fighting for it. Okay, Simon brings out one of his minor pieces. Good, mobilizing the army. So does his opponent. Okay, now Simon has opened up this lane for the bishop and opened up this lane for the queen later on. White develops another piece, mobilizing their army. Simon tries to undermine White's control of the center. So this is one of the main moves in the Caro Kann. I'm not very familiar with Caro Kann. I know a little bit, so I don't have too much commentary here. But again, fighting for the center. White again develops another piece, mobilizing the army. Simon takes, White takes. Now, Simon decides to preserve his light squared bishop, which makes sense. And this will also be a nice defender later in the game. We get a check, and Simon develops another piece while blocking the check, a multi-purpose move. White takes. And Simon recaptures, thereby developing his queen now. So once you bring the queen off of the back rank, off its home square, it's developed. So even though this is just one square, It matters, guys, and you'll see this as we play more and more games together. White castles, very good at getting king safety behind their nice little shield of pawns. Simon develops his bishop to c5. Now, this is the first place where I have a little bit of a comment. So because this bishop is undefended, we are walking into a bit of an X-ray here, and there could be some tactics. Like, for example, if knight takes here, maybe there's some tactics because this bishop's hanging. This is actually one of the main engine moves. I don't know. It's a little complicated, but I just wanted to flag that for you guys to be on the lookout that when you develop a piece, be careful if it's undefended and you're putting it in the way of an X-ray attack. In this case, I think it's actually okay, though. Now, white went knight b3. I really don't like this move. Why don't you guys think of what are some reasons why this might not have been white's best move here? And what is black going to do next? So Simon responded how I would have responded as well, with bishop takes bishop and the pawn recaptures. And the reason this is good for black, in my opinion, is because, number one, this bishop was a little problematic after it was hanging where we developed it. So we were able to get rid of that problem. And number two, more importantly, really, we were able to force white to have two doubled pawns. And these are going to be weak throughout the rest of the game. They can't defend each other. They don't move well together. Whereas black has a nice pawn chain here. So this was a pretty big mistake in my opinion. Now, this pawn capture does open up the file for the white rook, which is good in some sense because the rooks like open files. So it's kind of like white just developed their rook by doing this. The problem is I don't think this file is actually that effective because this bishop is here and the queen is here. It feels like there's just too much defense. After we castle, our rook is going to be sitting here defending. So I don't think that opening this file was worth the price of having these two targets that are going to get picked off long term. Now Simon brings his rook into the game, bringing the rook onto the semi-open file. Again, bringing all the pieces into the attack. White develops their queen now, simultaneously linking the rooks, right? So they're also still finishing their development. They do have some heat down this file, but again, we have the bishop here defending and we have the queen defending, and after we castle, the rook will be defending. So it's pretty solid. Now, what would you guys play here in this position? So you could take this pawn. It's not actually the best move. There's some complicated computer stuff, but also, you're maybe a little behind in the development here. So what else might you do in this position? So Simon went knight e7, which I fully agree with. Again, bringing his last minor piece into the attack, even though here it's hasn't advanced too far yet, it will. Preparing to castle and bring this rook into the game as well. So now at this phase of the game, both players are mostly developed. White still needs to bring this rook in at some point, but now it becomes about trying to improve the squares that your pieces are on, trying to get more piece activity, trying to zero in on weaknesses of our opponent. So long term for Simon, it's going to mean zeroing in on these pawns. For white, it's really not clear what they should do here because this is just a super solid pawn chain. There are no real weaknesses that I see. So white goes knight to d4, which makes sense, just centralizing the knight. And Simon goes knight to f5, trying to put the knight on a more active square. Takes, takes. Now white is trying to break things open, trying to stir something up, and also trying to get rid of their doubled pawns. So what would you play here as black? So Simon played the top move, which is pawn takes pawn, and then knight recaptured. You could have also gone bishop takes, then maybe everything trades. This is fine. Another move I considered, which should be on your guys' radar, is sometimes you can sack the exchange. That terminology means sacrificing a rook for either a knight or a bishop, because rooks are 5, bishops are 3 points in theory. And I considered this move because if you take, they recapture, then you recapture with the bishop here, And you have an outpost for the bishop where you have all this pressure and they can't really take it. They don't have any knights or bishops left to do that. They don't have any pawns that can kick us away. You know, this is something to consider. Like, it doesn't quite work here, I think, because we don't have pieces ready to like jump in. So I think it's just a little too slow and we kind of give up some material for it. But that's something to consider as well. So Simon played the best move, which is pawn takes pawn. Now the knight recaptures. Now what would you guys play as black in this position? So you could grab this pawn. If you do nothing, the problem is white is going to check you and win your rook, right? So that's the problem. So there is a threat here. And Simon found queen to d4 check, which it looks like we're almost picking up the knight, right? If they block the wrong way, like let's say they go rook here, we can actually just pick up the knight for free. So it's crucial that after this check that white plays knight to f2. And now how would you follow this up as black? So there's a few targets. You could take here, you could take here, you could take here. You could infiltrate with the rook and take here. Which do you guys think is best? So I would have gone rook takes c2, which is what Simon did. Just bringing the rook to the second rank. Rooks belong on the second rank. Or seventh rank. That's a common saying in chess because this is right in front of the king. It's usually a very devastating rank for your rook to be on. That was such a bad explanation. But now white infiltrates. So queen takes b7. And now in this position, what would you guys play as black? I want you to really give it some thought, soak in the position, and think about the key things I mentioned at the start of the video. So doing your chores, but also when it's time not to do your chores. So sometimes you need to deal with threats, sometimes you don't. What do you think this position calls for? Simon decides to castle, which I fully support. Great job. It's finally time to castle. So the queen is kind of infiltrating. There might be some checks at some moment that are uncomfortable. We need to get our king safety. We need to get this rook into the game. We're ready to maybe double up or double up on this file. So things are looking good for black's position here. Play continues. And now what would you guys play as black? So if it were me, I would have taken the central pawn because generally the central pawns are stronger. But Simon took on b2, which was also good. Taking on e5 was the top computer move, but this was also a good move, winning a free pawn. And now white decides to take our a7 pawn. But the problem is they didn't protect this pawn. So now Simon swings back and snags this. So I think he was a little bit lucky that they allowed this, but good job on him for capitalizing on the moment. Okay, white goes rook to e1. Now we need to move the queen. Where would you guys put the queen in this position? Simon went queen to b2, which I fully support. Now we have a lot of heat going this way. We do need to be careful though. Can we take this knight right away, guys? What do you guys think? Let's say we get to play another turn right here. Can we take here right now? No, no, no. Because the queen defends backwards there. So got to watch out for that. So it doesn't work right now. But if the knight moves, then we have pressure this way. So you see the power of stacking up on the second rank. And if I just back up a step, queen f4 was also a good move here if you saw this move, because now we have double pressure this way. But I like Simon's move even better. But now white starts to do to us what we're trying to do to them. So they stack up on the 7th rank and they have pressure on this pawn. And Simon decides, hey, let's just take another free pawn. So white accepts the queen trade. I don't really understand this move by our opponent. But Simon does a similar move. And it's different for Simon because here he's creating some space for his king, so there's no more back rank mates. So like, let's say this rook wasn't here and we have our wall of pawns, we'd have some back rank issues potentially. So he's creating a luft for his king, which makes sense. Now, white goes rook e3. I don't really understand this move. But what would you guys play here as black? I'm going to give you a hint. What piece would you like to bring into the game as black now that you have a brief moment to do something productive? So Simon goes rook to c8, bringing his final piece into the attack, trying to use his whole army against his opponent, right? So you see, do your chores every game. This is how the higher level players play. And you guys can too. It's not that hard. You know, these are just the fundamental things that people need to learn to start playing good chess. Now, white goes knight to g4. This is actually a pretty big mistake, in my opinion. And Simon does a great job again of capitalizing on it. So this is again a moment where white allowed us to double their pawns unnecessarily. And I think this is going to be a key problem for them the rest of the game. And I mean, they already had problems. They were down 2 pawns to begin with. So we'll see how this plays out. So Simon mobilizing his pieces, doubling the rooks on the second rank, A+. That's what you want to do. White delivers a check, and now you see why we needed this space. If we didn't have this, then it would be mate if there was still a pawn there. So good job. And now white defends the pawn. This is a really strange setup. But yeah, white is somehow defending this pawn, and you know, it's not so clear now how to make progress. So why don't you guys pause and think about what's going to be your plan for the rest of the game here as black. You're up 2 pawns. White's pieces are very awkward, very strange. So what's your plan? So my plan would be to, I mean, we somehow want to start utilizing the fact that we have a passed pawn and that we're up material. So the problem is this rook might start attacking us from the side. So we might have to kind of like slinky our way forward where like, you know, we move these up like one at a time and then like move the king up and then they kind of all move as a unit. We might have to do something like that. That would be my plan in this position. So Simon starts bringing his king more towards the center. This is what you want to do in the endgame, guys. So there's no more mating threats, really. And now the king is going to be an important attacking piece. White tries to sort of do the same. And now Simon thought, oh, well, actually, maybe I can double up on this pawn. And let's see what happens with that, which I like that idea a lot as well. And one more thing to mention about this rook to c4 idea is that, and once we stack up, at some point also, you know, our king might come forward more, and this might be able to block a check at a crucial moment. So we're kind of bridging the gap here, which is kind of a nice bonus. White decides to now defend this way. Now, interesting note here, white's king is could almost be made, well, actually could be mated right now. If we went like rook up and over, this would be a checkmate, right? So white's king is very boxed in on this side of the board. Okay, but play continues. So Simon follows up with his plan, increasing the activity of his pieces. And now white tries to create some problems for us. So we can't advance any further with our king because then white's going to take our pawns. Now I want you guys to pause here and really think, what is your plan as black in this position? Because like I said, I don't think you can come off the back rank. They're going to take your pawn. So what's going to be your plan to make progress in this position? So Simon's plan was to offer the rook trade, which his opponent took, which I think was very lucky on our part. The thing is, I think white could just maybe like shuffle, and like I don't see how you could make progress here really. So, you know, your plan needs to involve the king and the pawn. So what would your plan be now that we know that in this position? So if it were me, my plan that I came up with when I was reviewing this game was, well, maybe I can go like king f6, g6, then h5, and then if they move this pawn, we'd actually have a checkmate. So we can probably just win this pawn. That was my thinking. So let's show that on the board. So king to f6 is step 1. Step 2 is g6, h5. Now, if they take, let's say, look at this checkmate. Look at that. Look at that. So remember how I showed you guys that the king was very restricted in this position? So usually there aren't checkmates in endgames, but sometimes there are. Got to keep your eye out. There are other ways to play. So white could have checked here actually. And then I think if we step back to safety, basically we're able to like trade off the rooks here. So like after this, we force the rook trade and we're just up to pawns, and it should be easier to progress from here. So that might not have been the best plan ever, but that was my plan. But in the game, Simon offered the rook trade, which, you know, why not? You know, it's a free, if they want to take it, that's great for us, which they did. And I think now it's really easy because now we can just start rolling our pawns with impunity. Whereas before, this rook was doing a really good job of restricting our king and limiting our options of progress. So play continues. Now Simon brings his rook back, which at first I was kind of confused by. I was like, what do you know, what's the point of this move? But then after his next move, I realized, oh, he's trying to get behind the passed pawn, right? So that's a theme in endgames as well. Ideally, you want your rook behind the pawn to help support it to promotion. But this pawn can't do it alone, right? Because the rook's in the way. So Simon realizes, oh, I also need the king to come help. The problem, though, is we're kind of giving up ground. And this, I think king to f7 was actually okay. Alternatively, you could have tried maybe like f5 here. The computer also found this idea to bring the rook over. And then let's say white just like waits. Then bring the rook up and create this mating threat, which then forces white's king backwards. So white has to kind of retreat. There are like some in-between moves, but eventually we're going to advance with our king forward. So, you know, this is helping that progression. But yeah, as played in the game, Simon went king f7, which is okay if you followed up the right plan. But then he goes king to g8, and then all of a sudden white gets this really dominant king position. They're almost mating us here. We have to be really careful. So he starts to run this way and runs again. And white infiltrates. And now what would you guys play in this position? It seems like they're going to win your pawn. And, you know, are you still going to win this game? I don't know. So Simon found the winning idea, which is to just push the passed pawn. So they take, we take, but this pawn is just off to the races and it's game over. Or is it? So we promote, but white does still have two pawns, so we need to be a little careful, right? So we take one right off the bat. But now white starts pushing this pawn. This is a theoretical endgame. This is winning for black. But white needs to be a little bit, but black needs to be a little bit careful. So Simon, have you studied this endgame position? Do you know how this normally plays out? Because what you want to avoid, so we want to keep checking the king, and then we want the king to get in front of the pawn, blocking the pawn. And we need to be careful with our checks so that it doesn't allow the pawn to progress forward. Well, I mean, we don't have to, but, you know, in theory, this is like a more precise way to play. So instead of this check, which allows them to progress their pawn, what is an alternative check we could have delivered that would have prevented that in this position? So queen h4 would have been the best check here, because then the king has to step in front of the pawn. And if they go here, then you're going to take the pawn, right? So they have to step here. And now that gives our king a moment to step closer. So that's how this works when they only have one pawn left, is you're trying to get them to be stuck in front of the pawn for a minute. And then you advance your king closer to a stronger position. And then ultimately you win. And if you notice here, guys, what's white's next move? There's only one possible move in this position. So the king has to go to g7, thereby abandoning their pawn. And from here, it's just an easy checkmate. So we'll take a look at how this played out. So check, pawn pushes. Check, we're allowing another pawn push here. He decides instead, the opponent decides to go king to h7. And now we allow another pawn push here. This pawn's almost promoting. We went from a totally winning position to, oh no, what's going on here? So Simon delivers a check. And then delivers a check. Now, there's a risk in these positions, guys, right? We're up a queen, but it's possible we wouldn't win in this position, right? What might happen that would prevent us from winning here? So one thing is if they were able to promote the pawn for free. What else could we do that would not allow us to win this game? How about some stalemate ideas? So this is almost stalemate. If black isn't careful, like let's say they just go here, stalemate, draw, tie, right? You got to be so careful in this position. Or let's say you decide to go, okay, I'm just going to go queen h6, stalemate. Right, so it was sneaky. White did a really excellent job playing to the end, fighting for every opportunity, and black almost maybe messed up. I don't know. Simon, weigh in the comments here. Let us know, did this endgame feel under control for you, or were you sweating a little bit? So Simon, there is a good move here for black, so we don't have to stalemate them. Why don't you guys try to find what did Simon play in this game to finish it out? Simon found king to f6. You see that white resigned here because white's only move is king to f8. And what do you play here now as black? Checkmate, game over, good game. If you said queen to h8, unfortunately, you got a little confused by the board orientation. So the pawn can actually take here and you're losing. So the actual checkmate is queen to f7 mate. So this was an amazing game by Simon, in my opinion. I thought he played super well. He adhered to all those fundamentals I mentioned in the beginning of the video that all of you guys should adhere to as well. The only thing that got a little sketchy was in this moment where he started backing up and allowing white's king to infiltrate. And really it's this move, because like if he had gone up this way, he probably could have helped aid the pawn and, done some stuff like this. And his rook could have laterally defended the base of the pawn chain. But really it was this king g8 move. And then all of a sudden, oh no, we're almost mated. All these problems. So like the white's rook infiltrated and it was okay. He found the winning idea. Like, okay, yeah, I can still push. But in my opinion, we should try to avoid this. And then the queen and pawn endgame. So Simon, your homework is to YouTube queen and pawn endgames. I'm going to do a video on this at some point in the future, but it's not going to be for a while. So yeah, YouTube queen and pawn endgames, and make sure you know how to win this, which it seems like you kind of did, but like this check is a bit inaccurate in my opinion. This check also, like it'd be better to check here or even all the way here, because we just want to avoid the scenario where we allow white to keep progressing this pawn. And yeah, I got a little sketchy here. Check, check, and then almost stalemate, almost. But then you found the winning idea. So great job. Thank you for sending me a game. If any of you guys watching have a game you'd like to send me, I need more games. So send me an email at chesswithcody@gmail.com. I'll review it for free and give you a customized lesson like this. And with that, guys, I will see you in the next episode. Thanks a lot. And don't forget to do your chores.